In this lesson, you're going to learn the collision regulations to the standard necessary in order to pass RYA Yachtmaster. This lesson broadly follows the structure and sequence of the full text of the collision regulations which are published by the International Maritime Organization, IMO. You can download a full copy, courtesy of the UK Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, from the Resources tab. You might want to keep it to hand, along with a highlighting pen to mark important rules. Before we get started, it's important that you understand that the collision regulations hold the force of law, which means if you breach them, you may be prosecuted, especially if injury or damage occurs. In extreme circumstances, this might extend to a charge of manslaughter. Vessels may be registered under a flag state, which is why it's common to see large ships wearing, for example, the Panamanian flag. Vessels operate in the port or coastal states of their flag and other countries. Both their flag state and the associated port or coastal state may prosecute breaches of the collision regulations. Policing the collision regulations and other accidents at sea involving British vessels, wherever in the world they are operating, is the responsibility of the UK Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, whose Maritime Accident Investigation Board must be notified of any serious accident. They will then investigate and might produce a report and instigate legal proceedings. See the link on the Resources tab. Obviously, other countries have their equivalent body. So, for example, if you were unfortunate enough to have a serious accident on a British vessel in, say, US waters, you might find yourself embroiled in investigations and legal action on both sides of the Atlantic. Imagine, for example, a British registered yacht being sailed single-handed off the coast of West Africa. If the skipper were found to have failed to keep a proper lookout, resulting in a fatal collision with a small fishing vessel, they wouldn't be able to avoid prosecution by running home to the UK, although I guess their chance of a fair trial and surviving incarceration would be better than in, say, Sierra Leone. The rules are divided into 5 parts, A to E, and a number of annexes. You can link directly to any part or section from this index. Part A includes rules 1 to 3, covering general matters. Part B covers the steering and sailing rules, subdivided into 3 parts for the conduct of vessels in any conditions of visibility, in sight of one another, and in restricted visibility. Part C covers lights and shapes. Part D covers sound and light signals. Part E covers exemptions. Annexes 1 to 3 cover technical requirements, additional signals for fishing vessels in close proximity, and distress signals, which we cover in the lesson on safety. At RYA Yachtmaster level, you are not required to learn the rules verbatim or even to quote rule numbers, but you do need sufficient knowledge in order to determine whether there is a possibility of collision between your vessel and another, identify which rule applies, and take appropriate action. Your knowledge and understanding will be tested in the Collision Regulations exam, which forms a part of the final assessment for award of an RYA Coastal Skipper and Yachtmaster Theory Course Completion Certificate, and, even more importantly, by your examiner when you take the practical exam on the water. He or she will be unimpressed if you don't know your stuff. Please note that where lateral navigation marks are depicted in this lesson, they are in accordance with the IALA A system, red to port, green to starboard. Part A. General Rules. Rule 1 tells us that these rules shall apply to all vessels upon the high seas and in all waters connected therewith navigable by sea-going vessels, and that nothing in these rules shall interfere with the operation of special rules made by an appropriate authority for roadsteads, harbours, rivers, lakes, or inland waterways connected with the high seas and navigable by sea-going vessels. Such special rules shall conform as closely as possible to these rules. We'll see later that port authorities often use Rule 1b to favour large vessels whose safety and efficient operation might be compromised by smaller vessels, and especially leisure craft, foolishly and totally incorrectly asserting their right of way. In fact, the term right of way doesn't even appear in the rules. All vessels have the responsibility to avoid collisions. This is covered by Rule 2, which says that nothing in these rules shall exonerate any vessel, or the owner, master, or crew thereof, from the consequences of any neglect to comply with these rules, or of the neglect of any precaution which may be required by the ordinary practice of seamen, or by the special circumstances of the case. Basically, this means that you can't claim that you had right of way if you are involved in a collision and failed to take any avoiding action. Rule 2 also allows any vessel to make a departure from the rules in special circumstances with due regard to all dangers of navigation and collision, and to any special circumstances including limitations of all the vessels involved, where it is necessary to avoid immediate danger. Rule 3 provides general definitions used elsewhere in the rules. For example, vessel, power-driven vessel, sailing vessel, vessel engaged in fishing, etc. We'll get onto these later. Part B, Steering and Sailing Rules, Section 1, Conduct of Vessels in any conditions of visibility. Of course, every vessel shall at all times maintain a proper lookout by sight and hearing, as well as by all available means appropriate in the prevailing circumstances and conditions, so as to make a full appraisal of the situation and of the risk of collision. Every vessel shall at all times proceed at a safe speed at which she can take action to avoid collision and be able to stop within a distance suitable to the prevailing circumstances and conditions. The rules state that a safe speed is one where you can take both proper and effective action to avoid a collision, and where you can be stopped within a distance appropriate to the prevailing circumstances and conditions. Factors to consider include visibility, traffic density, your maneuverability, for example, stopping distance and turning ability, background lights on shore, dazzle and backscatter from your own lights, the state of the wind, sea, current, and nearby hazards, draft in relation to the available water. Every vessel shall use all available means appropriate to the prevailing circumstances and conditions to determine if risk of collision exists. If there is any doubt, such risk shall be deemed to exist. In determining if risk of collision exists, the following considerations shall be among those taken into account. Such risks shall be deemed to exist if the compass bearing of an approaching vessel does not appreciably change, and such risk may sometimes exist even when an appreciable bearing change is evident, particularly when approaching a very large vessel or a tow, or when approaching a vessel at close range. Assumptions shall not be made on the basis of scanty information, especially scanty radar information. In this scenario, you can see that the bearing is changing. The container ship will pass ahead of the yacht. However, beware, this only works if both vessels keep their course and speed. Large ships sometimes make very wide turns, and it can be extremely difficult to assess the situation accurately. Even though the bearing is changing, this yacht is in extreme danger. Proper use shall be made of radar equipment if fitted and operational, including long-range scanning to obtain early warning of risk of collision, and radar plotting, or equivalent systematic observation of detected objects. Very expensive commercial radar sets, such as might be found in large ships, are equipped with ARPA, which stands for Automatic Radar Plotting Aid. It can automatically identify and plot multiple targets, warning of collision risk. Less expensive radar sets, such as likely to be found on leisure vessels, can be equipped with MARPA, Mini Automated Radar Plotting Aid. The key difference being that with MARPA, the operator has to identify targets before automatic plotting starts. Once MARPA is enabled, the operator can move the cursor over the target to start tracking it. Initially, MARPA paints a square box around the target, telling you that it hasn't yet managed to get a good enough fix to calculate your closest point of approach, CPA, etc. After some while, with the exact time depending on how well the target is being resolved, the square box will switch to a circle with a vector extending in the direction of the target's relative course. Normally, the vector shows how far the target will move relative to your position in 6 minutes. In this case, CPA will occur in approximately 15 minutes at 0.74 miles, and the target's speed over the ground is 20 knots. You can set an alarm threshold on CPA. Of course, if you are also equipped with AIS and the target has an active AIS transponder, then you can get more information about it, which will be helpful if you need to call it up on the VHF. See the radar and electronic navigation lessons for more information. AIS, Automatic Identification System, is a relatively modern innovation, whereby vessels might carry a transponder which automatically warns of collision risk. Click anywhere on this chart to open a real-time AIS plot of the Solent area in another browser tab. It may take up to a minute to load, depending upon the speed of your internet connection. You will be able to zoom in and out, pan, etc., to see vessels being tracked under AIS worldwide. Click on any vessel to discover its details. In this AIS simulation, you can see that if both you and the dangerous target maintain your current course and speed, you will pass close ahead of the target. Perhaps not such a great idea if the other vessel is a large ship, because she is clearly navigating in a narrow channel. If there is any risk of collision, actions taken to avoid it should be positive, readily apparent, and made in ample time. There's no hard and fast rule, but Where a maneuver is required in order to avoid a collision, you should change course by at least 30 degrees. Particularly avoid making a series of small changes, which might be difficult for the other vessel to assess quickly and accurately. If there is sufficient sea room, alteration of course alone may be the most effective action to avoid a close quarters situation, provided that it is made in good time, is substantial, and does not result in another close quarters situation. Action taken to avoid collision with another vessel shall be such as to result in passing at a safe distance. The effectiveness of the action shall be carefully checked until the other vessel is finally passed and clear. If necessary to avoid collision or allow more time to assess the situation, a vessel shall slacken her speed or take all way off by stopping or reversing her means of propulsion. Rule 9 relates to the conduct of all vessels in narrow channels.
For example, a vessel proceeding along a narrow channel should keep as near to the outer limit of the channel which lies on her starboard side as is safe and practicable.
And a vessel of less than 20 meters in length, or a sailing vessel, shall not impede the passage of a vessel which can safely navigate only within a narrow channel or fairway. For example, where your instructor comes from, in the Western Solent, small craft must not impede the Lymington-Yarmouth ferry in Lymington River, north of the most southerly post, called Jack-in-the-Basket, or south of the red channel marker outside the entrance to Yarmouth.
And a vessel engaged in fishing shall not impede the passage of any other vessel navigating within a narrow channel or fairway.
Neither shall any vessel cross a narrow channel or fairway if such crossing impedes the passage of a vessel which can safely navigate only within such channel or fairway. It is generally safe to cross a ship half a mile ahead, and this is what a very large container ship looks like at that distance. If she were making 20 knots, which is about the maximum for most commercial shipping, this is what she'll look like after you've crossed her bow 20 seconds later, assuming you were making 5 knots. This is how you would appear to someone standing on the extreme starboard end of the ship's bridge wing. You would not be visible from the main area of the bridge. Small vessels can often navigate quite safely outside major shipping channels and should do so whenever large ships are using the channel.
In a narrow channel or fairway, when overtaking can take place only if the vessel to be overtaken has to take action to permit safe passing, the vessel intending to overtake shall indicate her intention by sounding the appropriate signal.
In this case, assuming that you wanted to alter course slightly to port in order to pass the vessel ahead down her port side, the appropriate signal would be 2 long blasts and 2 short blasts.
The vessel to be overtaken might agree by signalling 1 prolonged blast followed by 1 short, 1 long, 1 short, which is the Morse code for C, meaning yes or agreed, according to the International Code of Signals. She shall then take steps to permit safe passing. This does not relieve the overtaking vessel of its overriding responsibility to keep out of the way of the vessel being overtaken. If, on the other hand, you intend to overtake, passing down the other vessel's starboard side, you should signal 2 prolonged blasts followed by 1 short blast. The acknowledgement is, of course, the same. C.
A vessel nearing a bend or an area of a narrow channel or fairway where other vessels may be obscured by an intervening obstruction shall navigate with particular alertness and caution, and shall sound the appropriate signal, which is 1 prolonged blast. Such a signal shall be answered with a prolonged blast by any approaching vessel that might be in hearing around the bend or obstruction. Rule 10 deals with traffic separation schemes, TSS, which are established in congested areas in order to separate shipping into identifiable one-way lanes. In terms of the rules, they are narrow channels, and small vessels must not impede larger vessels within them. A vessel using a traffic separation scheme shall proceed in the appropriate traffic lane in the general direction of traffic flow for that lane. So far as practicable, keep clear of a traffic separation line or separation zone. Normally join or leave a traffic lane at the termination of the lane, but when joining or leaving from either side, shall do so at as small an angle to the general direction of traffic flow as practicable. In general, small craft should try to keep out of traffic separation schemes. However, if you are obliged to cross one, you must cross with your heading perpendicular to the TSS lanes, even if this means that you are swept sideways by the tide. The Coast Guard monitor traffic separation schemes by radar and AIS. If they detect a vessel transgressing the regulations, they might task an aircraft to photograph the miscreant for identification, using infrared if necessary. The skipper of this trimaran was fined nearly £10,000 in 2012. Recent fines have been even more punishing. Going back to Rule 1, competent authorities, such as governments, local and harbour authorities, may add to or amend the rules within their jurisdiction. For example, the Port of Southampton has established a precautionary area in the central Solent, within which vessels less than 20 metres length overall must not cross less than 1 kilometre ahead of or approach within 100 metres either side of a vessel more than 150 metres length overall. The skipper of a racing yacht has been made to pay over £100,000 in fines and costs after colliding with a 120,000-ton tanker in the precautionary area during Cowes Week 2011. Now try this quiz. Now we're going to step back to Rule 3 to examine the various different classes of vessels defined in the rules. The rules define a vessel as to include every description of watercraft, including non-displacement craft, wing-in-ground craft, and seaplanes, used or capable of being used as a means of transportation on water, even though at least one of these is pretty much a concept as of 2017. The term power-driven vessel means any vessel propelled by machinery. It might be anything from a small rubber inflatable driven by an outboard engine to a 300-meter-long, 500,000-ton supertanker. The term sailing vessel means any vessel under sail, provided that propelling machinery, if fitted, is not being used. Over the next few pages, we're going to show how various day shapes are used to signal different types of vessel. You can download a printable reference from the Resources tab. They are defined in Annex 1, together with the associated lights which we must show from dusk until dawn. These day shapes must be shown during the hours of daylight. If a sailing vessel has its sails up and is also using its engine, it is said to be motor sailing, and in terms of the rules, it is a power-driven vessel. It signals its status by hoisting a black cone, apex down, forward. Whilst it isn't always necessary to be wholly diligent in hoisting a motor sailing cone, for example when you are clearly motoring at speed in calm conditions, or when entering or leaving harbour with the mainsail up, it is discourteous not to show one when other vessels might not realize that you are under power. In some countries you can be fined for not hoisting one.
Vessel engaged in fishing means a vessel engaged in fishing with nets, lines or trawls that restrict maneuverability. Notice the two black cones with their apexes together, hoisted forward, which signal that this is a vessel engaged in fishing. Their gear might extend behind or to their side. However, unless they are trawling, if their gear extends horizontally for more than 150 meters, they signal this by flying a cone apex up in the direction of their gear. Incidentally, it's not uncommon for fishing boats to display shapes for a vessel engaged in fishing all the time, irrespective of whether they're engaged in fishing with nets, lines or trawls that restrict maneuverability. However, unless they are, they're just another power-driven vessel with no special status under the rules.
The term vessel constrained by draft means a power-driven vessel which, because of her draft in relation to the available depth and width of navigable water, is severely restricted in her ability to deviate from the course she is following. She signals her status by showing a black cylinder. The term vessel restricted inability to maneuver means a vessel which, from the nature of her work, is restricted in her ability to maneuver, as required by the rules, and is therefore unable to keep out of the way of another vessel. She signals her status by hoisting a ball, diamond, ball. When a vessel restricted in ability to maneuver is engaged in dredging or underwater operations, she shows two balls on her obstructed side and two diamonds on her clear side. A vessel with divers down might be considered engaged in underwater operations, and should hoist the shapes for engaged in underwater operations. However, small dive boats normally only fly either the International Code Flag A, top, or the PADI, Professional Association of Dive Instructors flag, bottom. Ideally, you should steer well clear of dive boats, but if you are obliged to go near them, you should navigate with extreme caution. The term vessel not under command means a vessel which through some exceptional circumstance is unable to maneuver as required by these rules, and is therefore unable to keep out of the way of another vessel. She signals her status by hoisting two black balls, one above the other. A vessel towing has no special status under the rules. However, when the overall length of a tow exceeds 200 meters, both the tug and the tow signal their status by hoisting a black diamond. When a vessel is restricted in its ability to maneuver as a result of towing, she signals her status by showing the shapes for towing and restricted inability to maneuver. A vessel at anchor displays one black ball forward. They can be hard to spot. A vessel aground signals her status by hoisting 3 black balls, vertically, one above the other. Most yachts simply carry a motor sailing cone and an anchor ball. Make sure you hoist your motor sailing cone apex down. The rules also use the terms underway and making way. Underway means that a vessel is not at anchor or made fast to the shore or aground. Rather confusingly though, making way is not defined but is generally accepted to mean moving through the water. So, for example, a fishing vessel drifting would be underway but not making way. Don't get too hung up on this, it only really matters when determining what lights a vessel might show, and what sound signals she might make in restricted visibility. By the way, notice how difficult it can be to discern day shapes in real life. A good pair of binoculars should always be kept at hand. The rules also use the terms shall and may. These have precise legal meanings. The term shall is used to indicate that something must be done, as opposed to the term may, which simply means that something is allowed, that is, that it can be done, but does not have to be done. For example, every vessel shall at all times maintain a proper lookout by sight and hearing. A power-driven vessel of less than 12 meters in length may, in lieu of the lights prescribed in paragraph A of this rule, exhibit an all-round white light and side lights. Part B, Steering and Sailing Rules, Section 2, determines the conduct of vessels in sight of one another. In most cases, when two vessels are in sight of each other, and there is a risk of collision, one is deemed the give-way vessel, and must maneuver to keep out of the way of the other vessel, which is known as the stand-on vessel. Rule 12 deals with situations where two sailing vessels approach one another so as to involve the risk of collision. When each has the wind on a different side, the vessel which has the wind on the port side shall keep out of the way of the other. In this scenario, sailing vessel B has the wind on her port side, and vessel A has the wind on her starboard side, so B shall keep out of the way of A. She can do this by making any maneuver she wishes, but perhaps the most sensible thing here would be to alter course to starboard to pass vessel A on her port side. Whilst it's not strictly a part of the rules, it is customary for a starboard tack vessel to hail a port tack vessel that does not appear to be giving way by shouting, "Starboard!"
Starboard! Sorry, didn't see you.
There are obviously many circumstances where this rule might apply. Here again, B has the wind coming from her port side and must give way to A, which has the wind coming from her starboard side. It takes a little practice to immediately recognize which side the wind is coming from on another vessel. This is the same scenario depicted from the perspective of vessel B. When both have the wind on the same side, the vessel which is to windward shall keep out of the way of the vessel which is to leeward. For the purposes of this rule, the windward side shall be deemed to be the side opposite to that on which the mainsail is carried, or, in the case of a square-rigged vessel, the side opposite to that on which the largest fore and aft sail is carried. In this scenario, A is the windward vessel, and shall keep out of the way of B. It's not unusual for this rule to cause some confusion. However, the rules state that when a vessel is in any doubt whether she is overtaking another, she shall assume that this is the case and act accordingly.
Hey, you're the windward vessel. Get out of my way.
No, you're the overtaking vessel. Keep clear of me.
Sometimes it's hard to say which side the wind is coming from on another vessel from your perspective. In daylight, close to another vessel, it's usually pretty clear. In this case, A is the windward vessel and must keep out of the way of B. But imagine it's night and you're on board sailing vessel B. This is pretty much what you'd see. Which looks pretty much the same as this. However, now A has the wind on her starboard side, and you must keep out of her way. So the rule says that if a vessel with the wind on the port side sees a vessel to windward and cannot determine with certainty whether the other vessel has the wind on the port or on the starboard side, she shall keep out of the way of the other. If you have a dinghy or yacht racing background, it is important to understand that the rules differ from the racing rules of sailing in a number of respects. The racing rules also use the term right of way, which does not appear in the rules. Whilst there is no compulsion, and ultimately the rules prevail, it is generally accepted that, where it can be accomplished in a seaman-like manner, cruising boats keep out of the way of boats that are racing. These guys are obviously racing, so, even though the rules say that they have to keep out of my way, I will bear away and go behind them. In this scenario, under the racing rules, the yacht on starboard tack would have right of way over the yacht on port tack, even though it's overtaking. The rules, however, always mandate that the overtaking vessel must give way. It's usually pretty obvious whenever yachts are racing, but one sure
No
way
way.
to tell is that
We're
a
not
yacht
racing and you're
will never
overtaking
wear an
me.
ensign. Rule 13. Overtaking. Rule 13 states that any vessel overtaking any other shall keep out of the way of the vessel being overtaken. Later in this lesson you'll learn that there's a hierarchy amongst different types of vessel, determining which type gives way when two different types approach each other. The best known example is that a power-driven vessel under way must keep out of the way of a sailing vessel. However, Rule 13 overrides this, so that, for example, a sailing vessel which is overtaking a power-driven vessel must keep out of the way of the power-driven vessel. Rule 13 goes on to define overtaking as approaching the other vessel from within a direction of more than 22.5 degrees abaft her beam. We'll consider lights later, but at night this means when you can only see the other vessel's stern light and not her side lights. Here the sailing vessel is overtaking the motor yacht. The rib is not. When a vessel is in any doubt as to whether she is overtaking another, she shall assume that this is the case and act accordingly, and any subsequent alteration of the bearing between the two vessels shall not make the overtaking vessel a crossing vessel, or relieve her of the duty of keeping clear of the overtaken vessel until she is finally past and clear. Rule 14 deals with situations when two power-driven vessels are meeting on reciprocal or nearly reciprocal courses so as to involve risk of collision. Each shall alter her course to starboard so that each shall pass on the port side of the other. Be very careful about situations like this. We might be tempted to assume that if we maintain our course, we will pass safely. However, the other vessel might interpret things differently and alter course to starboard. So, Rule 14 says, when a vessel is in any doubt as to whether such a situation exists, she shall assume that it does exist and act accordingly. We'll get to sound signals later, but here you might sound 5 short or more rapid blasts, which essentially means that you don't understand the other vessel's intentions, followed by 1 short blast to signal that you are altering course to starboard. Rule 15 dictates which vessel must give way when power-driven vessels are crossing. When two power-driven vessels are crossing so as to involve risk of collision, the vessel which has the other on her own starboard side shall keep out of the way and shall avoid crossing ahead of the other vessel. So, in this scenario, A should alter course to starboard to pass astern of B. Rule 16 tells us that if we're the give-way vessel, we must take early and substantial action to keep well clear. There's no hard and fast definition of early and substantial. However, remember that Rule 8 has already told us that any alteration of course and or speed to avoid collision shall, if the circumstances of the case admit, be large enough to be readily apparent to another vessel observing visually or by radar. A succession of small alterations of course and or speed should be avoided. The key thing is to show the stand-on vessel a different aspect, and this typically requires an alteration of course of at least 30 degrees. You might have heard the term, show them our red, or something similar, which means that if you've got your navigation lights on, you should turn sufficient to show the other vessel your red side light. Rule 17 covers what action the stand-on vessel should take. Take a look at this video.
Chief, ship set at graze on port side.
Thank you. The bearing is not changing. He's on the collision course. Ship on my port side, ship on my port side, with course 2, 1, 5, 12 knots. This is Navion Norvegia. What's your intention, please?
Navion Norvegia. Navion
Why not turning? He's not turning. Watchman, take the wheel. Captain, we have a collision situation. I need you on the bridge immediately.
Norvegia. I'm sorry to say that we're following the route. I cannot turn.
What do you think the officer of the watch should have done? Initially, at least, the stand-on vessel should keep her course and speed. This might be another situation where you may sound 5 or more rapid short blasts. Rule 17 allows the stand-on vessel to take action to avoid a collision as soon as it becomes apparent that the give-way vessel is not maneuvering to avoid collision. And shall take action when she finds herself so close that collision cannot be avoided by the action of the give-way vessel alone. However, a stand-on, power-driven vessel which takes action in a crossing situation shall not alter course to port for a vessel on her own port side. This is rather obvious because if the give-way vessel suddenly wakes up, their correct maneuver is to alter course to starboard and or reduce their speed. The best course of action is nearly always to alter course hard to starboard. You might signal this with one short blast. Under sail and out on the high seas, not in a narrow channel, you should stand on, in other words, maintain your course and speed, in order to give a ship the opportunity to assess the situation and to maneuver to keep out of your way. If you are worried that they haven't seen you, you can try calling them on channel 16. AIS is an absolute godsend in this respect, as it tells you their name, call sign, and mobile maritime service identity.
DYK Hamburg, DYK Hamburg, DYK Hamburg. Delta 3 Alpha Charlie 4. This is the sailing vessel Kipper, Mike Yankee Papa Tango 6 on your starboard bow. I say again, sailing vessel Kipper, Mike Yankee Papa Tango 6 on your starboard bow. Do you read me? Over.
If you've taken the VHF course, you might wonder why, if AIS has provided you with the other vessel's MMSI number, you wouldn't call them via DSC. There are a number of reasons. 1. Entering their DSC number takes time and is an error-prone procedure without a keyboard. 2. By using channel 16, you are broadcasting to all other vessels and the Coast Guard. And 3. Many large vessels turn off their DSC controller at sea in order to avoid excessive sécurité alerts. If you don't have AIS, you might try something along these lines, although it's much easier for the other vessel to miss or even ignore your call.
Bulk carrier in approximate position 50 degrees 21 minutes north, 003 degrees 40 minutes west, on a course of approximately 235 degrees. This is the sailing vessel Kipper on your starboard bow. Do you read me? Over.
If you believe the power-driven vessel is not maneuvering to avoid a collision, you can take action, but avoid turning to port, in case she has already started to turn. There is no perfect answer, but it might be better to quickly turn right around to starboard, even though in this case it would require a jibe. Here is one professional's advice. Rule 18 gives responsibilities between vessels, effectively creating a hierarchy, whereby vessels must keep out of the way of other vessels higher up in the order.
We learned the definitions of different types of vessel and their associated day shapes earlier under Rule 3. A power-driven vessel shall keep out of the way of a vessel not under command, a vessel restricted in her ability to maneuver, a vessel engaged in fishing, and a sailing vessel. A sailing vessel shall keep out of the way of a vessel not under command, a vessel restricted in her ability to maneuver, and a vessel engaged in fishing. And so on, up the hierarchy. I think you should get the idea.
The hierarchy applies in all situations except as required by Rules 9, 10 and 13, which deal with narrow channels, traffic separation schemes and overtaking. For example, whereas Rule 18 requires a power-driven vessel to give way to a sailing vessel, this does not apply if the sailing vessel is overtaking the power-driven vessel. Perhaps if you've had some prior training, you might be wondering about vessels constrained by their draft. Surely they fit somewhere into the hierarchy?
They are covered by the rule and might slot into the hierarchy above vessel engaged in fishing. However, the wording of the rule is slightly different. It says, any vessel other than a vessel not under command or a vessel restricted in her ability to maneuver shall avoid impeding the safe passage of a vessel constrained by her draft.
The thing is that power-driven vessels and sailing vessels do not have to keep out of the way of vessels constrained by draft if they are simply holding up the vessel constrained by draft without impeding her safe passage. Mind you, they might get pretty annoyed. For just this reason, many harbour authorities impose special restrictions on small craft navigating within their jurisdiction. Now try this quiz. Section 3 concerns the conduct of vessels in restricted visibility. which means any condition in which visibility is restricted by fog, mist, falling snow, heavy rainstorms, sandstorms, or any other similar causes. Rule 19 applies to vessels not in sight of one another when navigating in or near an area of restricted visibility. It reiterates the obligation that all vessels shall proceed at a safe speed for the prevailing circumstances and visibility, and requires power-driven vessels to have their engines ready for immediate manoeuvre. Except where it has been determined that a risk of collision does not exist, every vessel which hears apparently forward of her beam the fog signal of another vessel, or which cannot avoid a close quarters situation with another vessel forward of her beam, shall reduce her speed to the minimum at which she can be kept on her course. She shall, if necessary, take all her way off, and in any event navigate with extreme caution until danger of collision is over. For example, if you are in a sailing vessel in restricted visibility and hear one prolonged blast forward of your beam, even though that is the signal made by a power-driven vessel, you must slow down and, if necessary, stop until the risk of collision is past. However, there's a bit of an issue here because the other vessel might be tracking you by radar and determined that you are going to pass well ahead of them. But if you slow down or stop, then they might struggle to reappraise the situation, and more than one collision has resulted because of this. So, some skippers advocate maintaining their course and speed on the basis that if they're run down by a big ship, it's not going to make any difference whether they're doing 10 knots or 2 knots. Of course, you can level the playing field if you equip your vessel with radar and AIS. In fact, you'd have to be slightly unhinged not to do so if you plan to cross busy shipping lanes, especially as very capable radar and AIS functions can be incorporated into most chart plotters for less than £2,000. However, you then need to consider what the rules say about when you detect another vessel by radar alone that is coming into a close quarters situation. Rule 19 says, a vessel which detects by radar alone the presence of another vessel shall determine if a close quarters situation is developing and or risk of collision exists. If so, she shall take avoiding action in ample time, provided that when such action consists of an alteration of course, so far as possible the following shall be avoided: an alteration of course to port for a vessel forward of the beam, other than for a vessel being overtaken, an alteration of course towards a vessel abeam or abaft the beam. That's all a bit of a mouthful, and it's beyond the scope of this lesson to teach the skills needed to correctly identify the relative course and speed of another vessel and its closest point of approach. But what it comes down to is, as we've seen before, in most cases the correct action is to alter course to starboard. The exceptions are when another vessel is overtaking you on your starboard quarter, when you may alter course to port. Or when you are overtaking another vessel, when you may alter course in either direction. If you're interested to learn more about radar plotting for collision avoidance, there's an excellent set of videos from the US Northeast Maritime Institute linked from the Resources tab. Incidentally, whilst it's not part of the collision regulations, but instead a requirement of SOLAS 5, all vessels less than 150 gross tons shall carry a radar reflector or other means to enable detection by ship at both 9 and 3 GHz. It doesn't have to be permanently mounted, and small sailing vessels and racing yachts might elect to only hoist theirs in poor visibility. However, it should be positioned as high as possible because radar is line of sight. This type is very common, but unfortunately is very ineffective and totally useless if hoisted like this. It should be hoisted like this, in what is termed rain catcher orientation. However, this is difficult in practice. These types are much more effective, and when choosing one for your vessel, you should check its specification to ensure that its root mean square minimum radar cross-section area is at least 2 square meters from 0 to 360 degrees of azimuth at 20 degrees angle of heel. This specification comes from the World Sailing Offshore Special Regulations. This means that reflectors like these are typically inadequate. Active radar transponders like these, which amplify the radar pulses before returning them, are very effective but don't meet the SOLAS requirement, so you need to carry a passive one too. Ideally, you should avoid going to sea if fog is forecast, but if you are caught out, slow down, deploy your radar reflector, switch on your navigation lights, make appropriate sound signals, which are covered later, double your lookouts, perhaps stationing one crew member on the bow, and keep a dedicated watch on radar and AIS if available. Keep a listening watch on VHF channel 16 and the local harbour authority's working channel using dual watch. If you are under sail, have your engine ready for immediate use. If you are under engine, switch it off periodically and listen. Navigate outside channels and in shallow water if possible. Avoid using GPS to take you to obvious waypoints, which will become pinch points. Now try this quiz. Part C of the rules concerns the lights which shall be complied with from sunset to sunrise and during such times. It also covers the shapes exhibited by various types of vessel, for example, fishing vessels, vessels constrained by draught, etc., which we considered earlier and don't need to repeat. Rule 21 defines 6 basic types of light. Side lights, which show red on the port side and green on the starboard side to an angle of 22.5 degrees aft of the beam. Stern light, which is white and shows from an angle from 22.5 degrees aft of the beam on either side. Masthead lights, often called steaming lights, which are white and show to an angle of 22.5 degrees aft of the beam on either side and must be positioned higher than the side lights. All-round lights, which may be white, red or green and show through 360 degrees. Towing lights, which are yellow and show from an angle from 22.5 degrees aft of the beam on either side and are installed above the vessel's stern light. Flashing lights, which are lights flashing at regular intervals at a frequency of 120 flashes or more per minute. The rules specify the minimum visible range of different types of light according to the length overall, LOA, of the vessel. For example, the side lights and stern light on a vessel greater than 12 meters but less than 20 meters LOA must be visible for a minimum of 2 miles. Navigation lights must be installed where they cannot be obscured by deck gear or sails. Their lenses must be replaced if they become crazed, and they must be checked regularly. At night, at sea, they must be continually monitored. You should carry spare bulbs and possibly emergency battery-powered lights, which, whilst they don't meet the minimum visible range, are better than nothing in the event of total power failure on board. Vessels less than 20 meters length overall may combine their side lights into one bicolor light on the bow. A power-driven vessel less than 50 meters length overall shows one masthead steaming light. A power-driven vessel more than 50 meters length overall shows two masthead steaming lights, with the aft light higher than the forward light. Power-driven vessels less than 12 meters length overall may combine their masthead steaming light and stern light into one all-round white light.
It follows that a sailing vessel does not show a masthead steaming light. If she is less than 20 meters length overall, she may either combine her side lights into a bicolor light on the bow, or show a tricolor light, which combines her side lights and stern light at her masthead. A vessel less than 7 meters length overall, making less than 7 knots, may show one all-round white light. Remember, these lights only apply to a vessel under sail, and not if she is motor sailing, when she becomes a power-driven vessel and must show the appropriate lights.
A power-driven vessel less than 50 meters length overall. From ahead, from her port side, from her starboard side, from astern, but wait a minute, all we can see is a white light, correct? So we really can't tell that it's a power-driven vessel, let alone its length overall. It could equally be a sailing vessel. Come to that, it might be a shore light, or a vessel less than 7 meters length overall, an anchor light, or even possibly a steaming light where the vessel's side lights are below your visible horizon. It doesn't matter though, if you think about it. Whichever it is, if you're approaching it on a steady bearing, you need to take action. If the vessel's length overall is less than 20 meters, the side lights may be combined into a single bicolor light on the bow. From ahead, from her port side, from her starboard side. Remember, a yacht motoring or motor sailing is just another power-driven vessel, so she must show side lights and a masthead steaming light. The masthead light must be above the side lights. From ahead, from her port side, from her starboard side. Power-driven vessels greater than 50 meters length overall must show 2 steaming lights, with the aft higher than the forward. From ahead, from her port side, from her starboard side. Note that there's nothing in the rules to prevent a power-driven vessel less than 50 meters length overall from showing 2 steaming lights. So, for example, if, in an exam, you are asked to identify this vessel, the absolutely correct answer would be power-driven vessel probably more than 50 meters length overall from ahead. Notice that side lights might be positioned anywhere on the vessel, providing that they show through the correct arcs of visibility. From ahead, from her port side, from her starboard side. When 2 power-driven vessels are in a crossing situation, the give-way vessel will see the other vessel's red side light. And the stand-on vessel will see the give-way vessel's green side light. Seeing red means you must give way. You should turn sufficiently so that the stand-on vessel can see your red side light. When 2 power-driven vessels meet head-on, or approximately head-on, each alters course to starboard so that they pass red to red. Of course, if you see another vessel's stern light, you are the overtaking vessel and must keep clear of her. Of course, a sailing vessel doesn't show a steaming light. Again, if she is under 20 meters length overall, her side lights may be combined into a bicolor light on the bow. From ahead, from her port side, from her starboard side. Alternatively, again, if she's less than 20 meters length overall, she may show a tricolour light at her masthead. From ahead, from her port side, from her starboard side. When you turn your engine on, you must switch off your tricolour and switch on your bicolour and steaming light. Be very careful not to inadvertently set any of these configurations. You would be sending out the wrong signals and might confuse other vessels. The tricolour must never be used in combination with any other lights. You should never use a tricolour in the vicinity of shore lights. Side lights or bicolour give a better perspective, and you have more chance of being seen. You also need to be aware that tricolour lights can give big ships a false perspective on your position. In this scenario, the lookout believes that the stern light sector of your tricolour is a masthead light on a larger vessel hull down over the horizon. Sailing vessels may show red over green all-round lights, but in practice only very large ones do. A vessel at anchor less than 50 meters length overall shows an all-round white light. This might be at her masthead or another position where it can be seen all round. A vessel at anchor greater than 50 meters and less than 100 meters length overall shows an all-round white light forward and another aft, with the forward light higher than the aft. And her deck lights if she is more than 100 meters length overall.
A vessel engaged in fishing, except one which is trawling, shows two all-round lights vertically in a line, one above the other, with the upper one showing red and the lower one showing white. This one is underway, in other words, not at anchor, made fast to the shore, or aground, but not making way, so she's effectively drifting. Therefore she doesn't show side lights or a stern light. Note that vessels engaged in fishing other than those trawling do not display masthead lights for length. Also note that only vessels fishing, vessels not under command, and vessels restricted in their ability to maneuver can be identified by their lights as being either underway or making way. All other vessels can only be identified by their lights as being underway.
From ahead, from her port side, from her starboard side, from astern. It follows that if she is making way, she must show her side lights and stern light. From ahead, from her port side, from her starboard side, from astern. A fishing vessel trawling shows green over white all-round lights. From ahead, from her port side, from her starboard side, from astern.
Where two vessels engaged in fishing are engaged in pair trawling, both shine a searchlight forward and towards each other.
A vessel constrained by draft shows 3 all-round red lights vertically in a line one above the other, in addition to her normal side lights and stern light. Power-driven vessel greater than 50 meters length overall, constrained by her draft from her port side. A vessel restricted in ability to maneuver shows 3 all-round lights vertically, one above the other, with the upper light exhibiting red, the middle white, and lower red, and if she is making way, her normal side lights and masthead or steaming light or lights. Power-driven vessel less than 50 meters length overall, restricted in ability to maneuver from her starboard side. Where she is engaged in underwater operations, such as cable laying or dredging, she will also show 2 red lights, vertically, one above the other on her obstructed, working side, and 2 green lights, vertically, one above the other on her clear side. Note in this example the importance of her side lights, which tell you that she's making way. Maybe she's cable laying or towing a sonar array. A vessel not under command shows 2 all-round red lights vertically, one above the other.
Note that this vessel does not appear to be showing any masthead lights or side lights or a stern light, so she's not making way. If a vessel not under command is making way, she must show side lights and a stern light.
A vessel aground shows her anchor light or lights and 2 all-round red lights vertically, one above the other. A hovercraft or a power-driven vessel in non-displacement mode, planing or on hydrofoils, shows an all-round yellow strobe light flashing at least 120 times per minute above her masthead or steaming light.
A vessel towing shows normal side lights and 2 or 3 masthead lights in a vertical line. 2 if the overall length of the tow is less than 200 meters, and 3 if it's more than 200 meters. She also shows a yellow towing light above her stern light. If she is more than 50 meters in length, she displays a masthead light forward and lower. A vessel towing of less than 50 meters in length is not obliged to display the masthead light forward, but may do so.
Where the tug, and therefore also the tow, are restricted in their ability to maneuver, the tug will also show the associated lights. Here we see an example of a tug towing a large container vessel alongside. Note that in order to ensure that they can be seen from all directions, the container vessel is showing the lights for restricted inability to maneuver. And here we see the same configuration from astern. Notice the yellow towing light on the tug. However, note that because we are low on the water, we cannot see the restricted inability to maneuver lights on the container vessel. But of course, it doesn't really matter, because if we are approaching the tug and tow, we must be overtaking, and so, by default, the give way vessel. Where the tow is a partially submerged object, it should be lit by one or more all-round white lights.
Pilot vessels have no special status under the rules. However, they fly a red and white H flag, and at night show an all-round white light over an all-round red light, in lieu of a steaming light. Note that pilot vessels on duty do not display the lights for length. In restricted visibility, they may make 4 short blasts.
Incidentally, buoys always flash, and, with the exception of the flashing yellow light on a hovercraft, navigation lights don't, so you should be able to differentiate between the two. Here's a summary of the various light configurations. You can print it from the Resources tab.
We're now going to ask you to identify several sets of lights. Try to work out what type of vessel or vessels are showing them, and then advance to the next page to see the answer.
Well, so much for lights. Now we're into the home stretch with just sound signals to go. First, a couple of definitions. The rules use the word whistle to mean any sound signalling appliance capable of producing the prescribed blasts and which complies with the specifications. These are a bit technical, but basically they say that the bigger the vessel, the lower the frequency of the whistle, or, if you like, the deeper the tone. You might want to hover your finger above the volume control. Here's a 150 Hz tone as might be sounded by a vessel over 200 meters length overall. And here's one of 300 Hz that might be sounded by a vessel of 75 to 200 meters. Lastly, one for a vessel less than 75 meters. A vessel of 12 meters or more in length shall be provided with a whistle. A vessel of 20 meters or more in length shall be provided with a bell in addition to a whistle. And a vessel of 100 meters or more in length overall shall in addition be provided with a gong, the tone and sound of which cannot be confused with that of the bell. The rules add that a vessel of less than 12 meters in length shall not be obliged to carry these sound signalling appliances, but if she does not, she shall be provided with some other means of making an efficient sound signal. So you might as well just assume that all vessels shall carry a whistle of some sort. Of course, it's more common for small craft to refer to their whistle as a foghorn, but its use should not be confined to being used only in restricted visibility. The rules define a short blast as a blast of approximately 1 second, and a prolonged blast as a blast of between 4 and 6 seconds. Where 2 or more blasts are sounded, the interval between blasts should be approximately 1 second. When in sight of another vessel, any vessel might signal its maneuvering intentions by giving 1, 2, or 3 short blasts on its whistle. One short blast signals that you intend to alter course to starboard. Two short blasts, I am altering course to port. Three short blasts, I am operating astern propulsion. Note that this doesn't necessarily mean that you are going astern, just that you've put your engines astern. Five or more short rapid blasts means I don't understand your intentions, and is commonly used by the stand-on vessel to wake up a give-way vessel that doesn't appear to be manoeuvring to keep clear, or by a vessel only able to navigate in a narrow channel being impeded by another vessel. Incidentally, any vessel may supplement its sound signal with an all-round white light, but it's not that common these days. We dealt with the sound signals made by vessels in narrow channels earlier, but for the sake of completeness, here they are again. Now we will take a look at, or perhaps I should say listen to, the sound signals that vessels shall make in restricted visibility. Note the use of the word shall. These are not optional. A power-driven vessel making way shall make one prolonged blast every 2 minutes. A power-driven vessel under way but not making way shall make 2 prolonged blasts every 2 minutes. A sailing vessel shall make 1 prolonged blast followed by 2 short blasts every 2 minutes. 1 long followed by 2 short blasts is the Morse code for D, which, in accordance with the International Code of Signals, means I am maneuvering with difficulty.
So it is also the sound made by vessels engaged in fishing, vessels constrained by draft, vessels restricted in ability to maneuver, vessels not under command, and vessels towing.
A vessel towed, or if more than one vessel is towed, the last vessel of the tow, if manned, shall at intervals of not more than 2 minutes sound 4 blasts in succession, namely 1 prolonged blast followed by 3 short blasts. When practicable, this signal shall be made immediately after the signal made by the towing vessel.
Any vessel at anchor, except vessels engaged in fishing and vessels restricted in their ability to maneuver and carrying out their work at anchor, must sound a bell for 5 seconds every minute.
A vessel over 100 meters length overall at anchor shall sound a bell for 5 seconds forward, immediately followed by a gong for 5 seconds aft.
In addition to the foregoing, any vessel at anchor may sound 1 short blast, 1 long blast, and 1 short blast, which is the Morse code for R, Romeo, to give warning of her position and the possibility of collision with another vessel.
A vessel aground shall give the bell signal and, if required, the gong signal, and shall, in addition, give 3 separate and distinct strokes on the bell, immediately before and after the rapid ringing of the bell. We're now going to ask you to identify some sounds. Listen to them, wait for the finished message to appear, then advance to the next page to reveal the answer. A power-driven vessel underway. You might also infer from the tone that it's pretty big. I am altering course to starboard.
This is the signal for I am maneuvering with difficulty. Please keep clear of me. It might be any one of the following: sailing vessel, vessel engaged in fishing, vessel constrained by draft, vessel restricted in ability to maneuver, vessel towing or pushing, or vessel not under command.
A vessel over 100 meters length overall at anchor shall sound a bell for 5 seconds forward, immediately followed by a gong for 5 seconds aft. This is a large power-driven vessel under way but not making way. Well done. At last you've come to the end of this very long lesson. Now go on to exercise M.